Hi all, hope we're staying safe and well. As you can see, I've actually made it into school for this one, which is a bit different. Today we're going to have a look at Language Paper 2, Question 5, which is non-fiction writing. They call it transactional writing, so it's where you are writing for a particular aim or particular purpose. Now, this is obviously one of the most important questions on the paper, with it being worth half the marks of Paper 2, and therefore 25% of your English language GCSE. What I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to have a look at a question, look at how I would go about breaking the question down, how I would go about planning it, and then a modelled response to the to a first paragraph of a non-fiction writing task. I hope this is really, really useful. It's using the question from sample assessment material paper 1, sample assessment material 1 for paper 2, which is on the AQA website. It's the first sample material for paper 2, which we've been looking at elsewhere. So I'm going to present this Google document. Obviously, hope this is useful in terms of planning and preparing for question 5. Okay, so a typical section B or question 5 will have this information at the start, which is very, very important to understand and be able to appreciate what the exam board is asking us. It says you are advised to spend about 45 minutes on this section. I would argue that you need that as a minimum to be able to do this section well and give it justice. Far too many candidates spend too long looking at questions 1 to 4, and therefore they don't leave themselves enough time to do justice to this question. People forget that this is worth half the marks on the paper, and you need to spend the appropriate amount of time working on it to make sure that you give it the justice it deserves. You are reminded of the ability to write in full sentences. Again, this is something that people forget. They get lazy because this is the last bit of the paper and they get tired. Make sure you are punctuating accurately and make sure you are using that variety of sentence forms. Are reminded of a need to plan your answer. It is staggering the amount of people who do not plan for this big question and find themselves rambling or stuck in a corner and can't actually work out where to go next to their writing. And then leave yourself enough time to check your work at the end, making sure that you're proofreading, making sure that you've not made any silly mistakes or silly errors. So this is a typical question. Homework has no value. Some students get it done for them, some don't do it at all. Students should be relaxing in their free time. Write an article for a broadsheet newspaper in which you explain your point of view on this statement, and you are awarded 24 marks for content and 16 marks for technical accuracy, which includes things like sentence forms, your use of punctuation, and your use of paragraphing. So ultimately, we're awarded 24 marks for how good your writing is, like looking at what sort of arguments you make, how you can write for the particular purpose that you've been given, and 16 marks is for how accurate that writing is. Does it actually follow the standard English rules, making sure that you've checked your work at the end and made sure that you've not made any silly mistakes. Now, when we approach a question, a strategy that I like to use is to give the question a slap. Now, this is an acronym that's quite useful for developing an answer, or helping to set your stall out before you start writing, helping to plan your ideas out and think about what am I actually being asked to do, because you don't want to start a piece of writing and realize halfway through that actually I'm not really doing what I've been asked to do. It's a nice little acronym. It's much like TIP-TOP that we used for question 3 on paper 1, where it was time, place, topic, person. These are 4 elements of the question that you need to identify before you can start. So the S from SLAP is the style of text that you are being asked to write. Actually, what am I being asked to write? And can I adjust my writing appropriately to match that particular purpose? Are you being asked to write a letter, in which case you would start with "Dear Sir, Madam," and you would end with "Yours sincerely" or "Yours faithfully," depending on the appropriateness of that response? Are you being asked to write a newspaper article, which would require a heading, might require subheadings on the way through? Are you being asked to write a speech in which it would lean much more towards the first person and your personal perspectives? Are you being asked to write a leaflet, which again would include subheadings and include headlines? Or are you being asked to write like a blog, a web article, which would be looking more towards the first person? Now, there are some of these that are very similar, like a web article and a speech could both be the first person point of view, but making sure you're aware of what you are being asked to do is significant and is important. The L from SLAP is language. Now, you are being asked to write in a certain manner. Is it informal? where you are writing for an audience who are going to be expecting colloquialisms, who are going to be expecting a more chatty and conversational style? Or is it more formal, where it's someone who you potentially don't know, or someone who you are meant to be treating with respect, a formality level to it? If you are being asked to write in an informal manner, you don't use slang and you don't use text speak or abbreviations. But what you do manage to do is to change your style to make it and adapt it a little bit more chatty and a little bit more conversational. Okay, so it's important to know whether it's formal or informal language. Your audience is the A from SLAP. Who are you writing for, and who do you want to attract with your piece of writing? Is it, for example, your year group? Is it younger students? It might well be the general public. It might be the readership of a particular magazine or a particular newspaper. It could be a head teacher. It could be a member of parliament. All of these have been used in the past, and you will adjust your writing appropriately to match that. You would not use the same sort of tone that you would for a headmaster that you would for your peer group, because you are operating on different levels. And then that's important to be able to adjust your writing to match that particular purpose, the particular audience, sorry. Because the final P is the purpose of your writing. Now, this could be, but is not limited to, analysing, reviewing, commenting or explaining something, arguing, persuading or advising. Now, that will be a verb that features within the question, and it'll show you what you've been asked to do. So, for example, being able to argue a point of view is slightly different to analysing the different pros and cons of something. And it will change in the balance of your writing, how you're going to be asked to do. It will just essentially, as well, by planning this and by identifying it from the question, you are giving yourself time to work out what your strategy is going to be in approaching this question. Language devices. This is another neat acronym that I quite like using, which is AFOREST. Now, it's not a complete list of language techniques that you can use, but it is a good starting point, and it is a good example of things that you could use that will give you some ideas to get you started. So you could use alliteration, facts, opinions, rhetorical questions, pronouns, repetition, emotive language, similes and metaphors, and the rule of three. So, for example, the alliteration, it might be that swooping, swirling, and sailing ahead is a good example. A fact, 49% of those surveyed would agree. Opinions, it cannot be argued that homework is useless. So it cannot be argued homework is useless. Rhetorical questions, how would you feel if you were caught up in this situation? Repetition, mud, mud, and more mud. Emotive language, it was incredible, the best ever. Similes and metaphors, he was as fast as lightning. And then the rule of three, the triplets, the class were fantastic, amazing, and incredible. Likewise, you may want to adjust your structure to make your language interesting. So things like paragraphs, you may have some paragraphs that are much longer. You might have single line paragraphs for effect, and being able to control that shows a good understanding and a good control of writing, which will bring up your SPAG marks, those 16 marks. Sentence structures, you've got a range of longer, such as compound and complex sentences, and also shorter, simple sentences, using a range of engaging connective rather than just using commas all the time. Think about using adverbial phrases at the start, or think about using interesting connectives. Punctuation, make sure that you've included correct punctuation, but not only the simple punctuation, such as full stops and capital letters, but if you've used speech like direct quotations, you've got the speech marks in there, using commas to break up compound and complex sentences, and then semicolons and colons as appropriate. So there's a lot to think about with this question, a lot to get your teeth into. Looking back to our question, this is how I've gone about annotating it. Now, you might want to do this in your exam booklet. You might want to do it on your exam paper. I would personally do it in your booklet because it gives the examiner an ability to see where your mind was when you were planning. It gives the examiner a chance to look at your plan before you get started. And obviously they won't see, well, not obviously, you don't know that. They don't see your question booklet. It's disposed of after you finish with it. It's not given with your answer booklet. So looking at this question, I've identified that the style of the question that we've been asked to write is in newspaper articles. It says write an article. So we know we're writing an article, which is generally first person and generally an opinion piece. The language is going to be formal with some personal touches because it's writing for a broadsheet newspaper. It's not a tabloid, it's a broadsheet, which is a more sophisticated newspaper. The audience are going to be those newspaper readers because it says write an article for the newspaper. And the purpose is to explain your point of view, which is sort of persuasion, sort of argument, but ultimately you are explaining a point of view that you have. And you're going to use your experiences and your understanding to develop that. So as you can see, SLAP, I've identified I'm writing a newspaper article with formal language and personal touches for newspaper readers, explaining my views on homework. Okay. Now, it's important at this point to plan. Lots of people plan in lots of different ways. I personally like to do spider diagrams or cycles to show this is what my first paragraph is going to be, this is what my second paragraph is going to be, this is what my third paragraph is going to be, etc., etc. Some people do it as like a flowchart. Some people do it where they just jot down ideas. Personally, I find a little bit of structure helps me to plan out my ideas. Now, this is normally what I would go for. Either I would have something in the middle with arrows going off, or do it like a cycle like this. So I'm going to aim to write my 6 paragraphs in 45, 50 minutes, okay, with a bit of time to read through them as well. Some of them are going to be shorter. So like an introduction and a conclusion are probably going to be much shorter than the meat of my response, which is the main ideas here. So I'm looking back at the idea of how do I feel about homework? In my introduction, I'm going to have a couple of sentences about how I feel about homework, and we'll try and grab my reader's attention in that point. Paragraph on point 1, I'm going to talk about how homework puts added stress on a student's fragile self-esteem and anxiety. Interesting point, I can get into lots of depth about how homework affects student self-esteem. Point 2, I'm going to look at how students should be relaxing and enjoying extracurricular activities in their free time. Now, what's clear is the idea of self-esteem and anxiety is very different to enjoying extracurricular activities. Yeah, so that will be a definite difference in paragraph, and it's a different point that I'm going to be making. My third point was going to be that homework is often rushed or copied, its educational worth is limited and questionable. And then point 4, homework is only increasing over time, and actually what is needed is a better communication with school. And then at the end, I'm going to summarize my points in a conclusion. I like to plan like this because it helps us set out my ideas. And if an examiner can see this, even if you don't quite get it finished, you may still get credit for what you were planning to do. There's no guarantee for that, but helping to plan and setting out some ideas is really, really useful, and it helps to set your argument out of how you're going to construct your response. For example, it might well be something along the lines of, if you're going for a different question, nurses are underpaid, football's wages should be donated to nurses. Your first point might be that nurses spend time saving lives, whereas footballers are in the entertainment industry. Your second point might be that, however, footballers are in the top 1% of people who are able to do their job, and you can set out your same arguments and the same ideas. This is a good way to do it because it will help you to plan and know where you are going. Too often, people don't plan because they're panicking for time, and then they just start writing, and what they'll find is their ideas mashed together. There's a limited amount of structure, and they don't actually spend the time cohesively, and they don't plan well. What I would be expecting is within each paragraph, I'm trying to use a range of different language devices. And if I go back to the Forest techniques, these are the sort of techniques I'm going to be expecting to see. Not limited to these, but certainly trying to include these as much as you possibly can. So it might be worth in your plan jotting down a forest across the top or down the side, and then trying to link for each paragraph some ideas that you could potentially use. That might be getting into a little bit too much depth for a plan if you're only going to spend about 5 minutes on your plan or 10 minutes on your plan. But thinking about some techniques you could potentially use. What I've done is I've written paragraph 1 here. I've written a paragraph looking at stress and self-esteem in students to do with homework. So we're going to have a look at it together, and I'm going to highlight some techniques that could potentially be identified from within this sample paragraph. So here we go. Homework, a scourge on every student in the country. Initially, one could consider the added pressure which homework brings to students already burdened with exam stresses and strains. Imagine, if you will, a horse carrying a heavy load. There is only so much more weight it can take before they break down in the dirt. Although this might seem dramatic, in recent years there's been much research into student well-being and anxiety. In a study by a children's health charity, 76% of cases, students reported that one of their biggest pressures was homework, particularly around pressure points in the year such as mock exams. If we truly value our students' mental health, we must take these concerns seriously and take critical looks at the way homework is distributed and used in school. This should be an educational priority. So if I'm going to highlight and annotate different ideas here, what we can look at is the techniques that have been used. Straight away, I've tried to include a range of punctuation. A good way of including a colon at the start is to give a definition or to give an explanation. So, for example, homework, colon, a scourge on every student in the country, is a really good way to include some high-level punctuation that the examiner is going to be aware that you know. So you can also use this to open up a list. So you could say homework, semicolon, colon, and then dull, boring, and pointless, full stop, because it opens up a list. Either way, it's a really interesting way to open up your paragraph, and it shows that control over punctuation. I've got this initially, so I've tried to use a different opening. I tried to use one of these adverbial phrases. Initially, one could consider the added pressure which homework brings to students already burdened with exam stresses and strains. So I've tried to include some alliteration in there. Yeah. So we have stresses and strains. You could use. I could have changed the sentence and said the added pressure which homework brings to students already burdened with exam cramming and crushing, for example, would be another good example of alliteration. Imagine if you will. Now, what I've tried to do here is to invite the reader to think about things from their point of view. So I'm giving them a command, imagine if you will. So that's a pronoun. It's not quite a rhetorical question, but it's still using that second person voice. A horse carrying a heavy load. There is only so much more weight they can take before they break down in the dirt. So what I've tried to do here is to include a metaphor for the idea of what homework does to a student, the pressure and how it would be creating that, like a horse that's burdened with a load and collapsing in the dirt. And because it's meant to be either amusing or shocking, I've included the exclamation mark at the end. So my punctuation's already shown a little bit of variety here. Although this might seem dramatic, in recent years, there's been much research into student well-being and anxiety. In a study by Children's Health Charity, 76% of cases, students reported that one of the biggest pressures was homework. Now, this is a statistic that I have elaborated as a fact about a study by a Children's Health Charity. It's giving kudos, it's giving gravity to my argument, but I've made it up. The examiner's not testing what you know about student mental health. What they are testing is your ability to write. So if you can add statistics, you can make these up. They don't have to be accurate. Okay, but use a reliable source. So I've said in a study by a Children's Health Charity, 76% of cases, students reported the biggest pressure was homework. Now, I shouldn't have put it in there, 76% of cases. That's why you put the proofread. There we go. So in a study by a Children's Health Charity, in 76% of cases, students reported that one of their biggest pressures was homework, particularly around pressure points in the year, such as mock exams. Now, what you'll see here is actually I've embedded a clause within this. So the 76% of cases has been embedded within there. Now, that's showing my control of sentence structure. If I read this, in a study by a Children's Health Charity, particularly around pressure points in there, such as mock exams, you've got the embedded clause within, which adds the extra detail. Finally, if we truly value our students' mental health, we must take these concerns seriously. We, collective pronoun, is an interesting use of language. We must take these concerns seriously and take critical looks at the way homework is distributed and used in schools. And I've ended with a simple sentence that actually helps to summarise my argument. This should be an educational priority in variety to the more complex and compound sentences that are used elsewhere in this paragraph. So within this, there is a load of things going on, but it becomes with practice. The best way to prepare for question 5s is to have a look at typical exam questions and plan your responses and write paragraphs for your topics and have a look at how they would work and what you would use for them. Now, for today, a good example might be to consider a second point from here and to develop a paragraph for it. But obviously, have a look at this one and that will give you some ideas to have a look at. Okay, I'm going to stop for a second and I'll come back to you. I hope that's been really, really useful run through for question 5. Obviously, like I say, you can check on these past questions on the AQA website. You can download sample material. You can have a look at past papers and see what a typical question 5 looks like. A lot of them are to do with school because they try to do things that you are familiar with or that the vast majority of people taking that exam will be familiar with. But they do ask a range of different ideas and a range of different questions. Like I say, I hope that was really useful. And that takes us through to the end of our run through for English language paper 2. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and hopefully we're back in school in the next couple of days or so. Take care.